What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today I wanted to talk about sprint-out times in the Call of Duty Vanguard Beta. This is something I've seen several people discussing in the community, and much of this discussion is centered around the in-game stated stats, because if you hit R2 when you're in the attachment menus for a weapon, you can see the actual values in-game for various stats. However, I did want to point out, although most of these stats appear to be very accurate, like perfectly accurate, one of the main ones that is way off is sprint out time. And what I mean by way off is there isn't even a trend with this that lines up with the actual sprint out times. And I went ahead and tested all of the sprint out times for all of the guns. And I did want to present that data for you guys in this video so you can at least be armed with the correct information if you are trying to give some feedback on this. And then I also wanted to share my opinion on the sprint out time in this game and whether or not I feel it's too fast, too slow, or just right as it is. Now, for those that aren't aware, sprint out time or sprint to fire time is the delay between sprinting and firing your gun. So if you're sprinting and then as you're sprinting you pull the trigger, it's the amount of time it takes between your trigger pull and your gun actually firing, and it tends to be faster with lighter handling weapons like SMGs and slower with LMGs. And sprint out time is a very important stat in a Call of Duty game. In a lot of ways, it can determine the pacing of the game, or at least it can contribute to the pacing of the game. Because if your sprint out time is way too slow, then you're going to be punished heavily for sprinting, and therefore you're going to be more hesitant to sprint. You're going to be sprinting less, and that slows the overall pace of the game down. Whereas if you go too fast with the sprint out time, then you run into a lot of connection related issues where you can come around corners and be killing people before they even see you due to network delays and everything. And that leads to unfair situations. Plus, I think most people would agree that there should be at least some punishment for being caught sprinting. You shouldn't be able to just sprint around like a headless chicken and not have any sort of punishment for it. So with that, let's dive right into the numbers, and I'm going to compare this directly to Modern Warfare sprint out time because it's the only other Call of Duty game that had tactical sprint, and a lot of the mechanics are carrying over. We also have a relatively similar time to kill in this game. So in Modern Warfare for assault rifles, the average sprint out time was 267 milliseconds. And then when it comes to our average tactical sprint out time, this was 400 milliseconds. In the Vanguard Beta so far, the STG and the BAR both have those identical sprint out times. It's the same as you'd expect with an assault rifle in Modern Warfare. However, the ITRA Burst has a much slower sprint out time. Its standard sprint out time is 400 milliseconds, which is a very long time for a standard sprint out time. And then if you're coming out of a tactical sprint, it takes 634 milliseconds with the ITRA Burst, which is extremely slow. In fact, this is far slower than any gun in Modern Warfare, even LMGs. As for the NZ41, it's kind of in a middle ground. Its standard sprint out time is 317 milliseconds, and its tactical sprint out time is 484. So if we eliminate the ITRA burst from the equation, the sprint out times for assault rifles are roughly in line with Modern Warfare, and I think that's fine, although it is very slow with the ITRA burst. Now let's move on to SMGs, and in Modern Warfare, our average sprint out time for SMGs was 160 milliseconds, and our average tactical sprint out time for SMGs is 237 milliseconds. Comparing that to Vanguard, our average sprint out time for the SMGs we have access to is 195 milliseconds, and the tactical sprint out time is 278 milliseconds. So with SMGs, it's a little bit slower than average compared to Modern Warfare, but not by a really large margin. It's not a massive discrepancy here, it is just a bit slower though. But next up, let's move into the marksman rifles, and in Modern Warfare, our average was 239 milliseconds for our standard sprint out time, and 361 milliseconds for our tactical sprint out time. In the beta for Vanguard, we only have access to the M1 Garand when it comes to the marksman rifle category, so it's not much of an average here, but I did want to point out our standard sprint out time is 484 milliseconds, which is extremely slow for a standard sprint out time, and then our tactical sprint out time is 701 milliseconds, which again, this is ridiculously slow. Way slower than any gun in Modern Warfare, and with this sort of a sprint out time, the enemy could kill you at least 3 times over before you can even fire a shot, which is painfully slow. But finally, for the categories I wanted to talk about in this video, because these are the categories where sprint out time matters the most, let's talk about LMGs. And in Modern Warfare, our average LMG sprint out time was 317 milliseconds, and our average tactical sprint out time for LMGs is 467 milliseconds. In the Vanguard Beta, I was actually quite surprised to see how fast this is, especially compared to the stated values. Our average sprint out time for LMGs is 359 milliseconds. which is still a bit slower than Modern Warfare, but faster than I expected. And then when it comes to our tactical sprint out time for LMGs, it's 534 milliseconds, which again, it's slower than Modern Warfare, but not ridiculously slow like we saw with the M1 Garand. And with LMGs, you do come to expect fairly slow sprint out times. But there you go, that's the data on this with our actual experience sprint out times in-game. Now here is where I wanted to share my opinion on this, and I will admit I am a player that likes playing aggressively. I like a fast-paced Call of Duty game, so that is my bias. However, I'm trying to set that aside and look at this more objectively, so I'm trying to look at both sides of this, and I'm doing my best to mitigate my bias here. In my opinion, the sprint out times are a little bit too slow on average in the Vanguard Beta. I honestly felt like the sprint out times in Modern Warfare were, if anything, slightly on the slow slide, but overall, I didn't have much of an issue with the sprint out times in that game. And therefore, at the very least, what I'd like to see done to sprint out time, if they are willing to make adjustments here, is bring those sprint out times more in line with Modern Warfare. I'm not saying the players shouldn't be punished for being caught sprinting. Of course they should. I'm not looking for a 0 sprint out time. I just think, especially when we're looking at the time to kill a Vanguard, which feels very fast, I just feel for several of the guns at least, there should be a little bit less punishment for being caught sprinting. I'm not saying you should have the advantage by any means, I just don't feel like you should be able to be killed literally 3 times over before you can even fire your weapon. And that is the case when it comes to guns like the M1 Garand, the ITA Burst, and the DP27 LMG. So yeah, overall, I'm not saying the sprint out times definitely need to be reduced across the board or anything. I think several of the guns are in a great place, especially the guns that are right in line with where the sprint out times were in Modern Warfare. It's more so those outliers that I feel are just too much of an outlier. The slowest sprint out time that we saw out of any of the guns in Modern Warfare when it came to tactical sprint out time, this was 500 milliseconds, and we already have several guns in this game that have a very noticeably slower sprint out time than that, and I just don't think that should be the case. I think 500 milliseconds on a tactical sprint out time should be the absolute maximum sprint out time for any gun. I don't care how heavy and bulky that gun is. 500 milliseconds is a long time in Call of Duty. And then when it comes to those standard sprint out times, I think they should be more so just in line with what we saw in Modern Warfare. So perhaps just speed up a bunch of the guns just a tad across the board to bring it more in line with those Modern Warfare values, and I think that would lead to better overall balance when it comes to these sprint out times. As it is right now, these sprint out times are not a deal breaker for me. Yes, it's a bit annoying using some of these outlier guns that have extremely high sprint out times, but on average, it's not bad. It's not significantly harming my enjoyment of this game so far. It's just a little thing that I picked up on and noticed that I think could use some improvement. Now, of course, this is just my opinion. I'd like to hear in the comment section below, what are you guys feeling about these sprint out times so far in the Vanguard Beta? Do you think they're totally fine as is? Do you think they do need to be sped up just a little bit? Would you like to see them more in line with Modern Warfare? Or are you on the other side? Do you think they should even be slowed down more? Just let me know those thoughts down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.